Hi and welcome. This week I'm taking a look at the Benelli TnT 135. Now this is, I guess you could call it, yet another Grom competitor, and certainly the Honda Grom has the largest market share. This particular model has been out for a couple of years now with a few changes, though we've only just really received it in Australia within the last year. And if you grew up in the 70s like I did, you'd probably also have a real interest in mini bikes. Though of course this bike and the Grom are a lot larger than the bikes of that era. They were quite small really. But still, you know, if you grew up in that era and couldn't afford one, which I certainly couldn't, I had to make do with whatever second-hand motorcycle I could come across at a very low price to ride around in the paddocks and on the track in the day. You really hankered after those sort of shining beacons of mini bike goodness from Honda and Kawasaki, and to a lesser extent from Taiwan at the time. Now, while this is a Grom competitor, personally I think it is a slightly better motorcycle from a performance point of view. I mean, it's a 135cc engine, and even though that's not really that much extra capacity, on the road that does make a bit of a difference. Also, the engine design is a bit more modern than the Honda Grom engine. The engine on the Grom can trace its roots right back to the 60s in step-throughs and small motorcycles. That horizontal single-cylinder, single overhead cam 125 really does have a really long history, and while that stands it in good stead, it also in some respects does date what it's capable of being developed into. Now the engine on the Benelli is again a single cylinder, but this time it has a 4-valve head and is twin plugged as well. And the amazing thing is it has a red line of over 9,000 RPM, and all that RPM is certainly very usable, and the bike really likes to rev. You know, I found on the road that once you got the RPMs over 7,000 RPM, you had a nice power band between 7 and 9,000 RPM when you're sort of in a bit of a sporting mode on the road. Around town you could certainly tootle it around sort of around 5 to 6,000 RPM. But in reality, this engine doesn't really do anything until you get it over 7,000 RPM and into the power band. Now the specifications of the engine are, it's a 135cc and has a bore and stroke of 54 by 58.8 millimeters. The rated output is 9.5 kilowatts, or roughly 13 horsepower at 9,000 RPM. And the maximum torque figure is 10.8 Newton meters at 7,000 RPM. The engine is Euro 4 compliant, and it runs a wet clutch and a 5-speed gearbox. Now I certainly found, that extra gear, because this has one extra gear over the Honda Grom and the Kawasaki. I really found that really useful around town. It really allows you to get off the line quickly, and the gear changes are really good. It has a very light clutch, and the gear changes were light and positive, and it was very easy to quickly snap up through the gears, taking the engine up to close to its red line on each change, and it was really quite enjoyable, and even more so when you sort of got into the twisty bits and could actually really rev the ring off it. Not that you're doing really illegal speeds on this bike. The most comfortable area that it likes to sit in speed-wise would be between 60 and about 95, 97 kilometers per hour. It really is very comfortable in those. It'll cruise along in the mid-90 kilometers per hour, on highways and freeways with slight hills up and down. You can certainly get it up over 100 kilometers per hour, and on the flat with no inclines, it'll certainly sit on 100 kilometers per hour, but you're sort of really near the edge of its performance limit. It will probably go close to 120 kilometers per hour in ideal conditions, but it's certainly that's not a sort of speed that you're going to be able to do on this motorcycle for long distances. Really, it's most comfortable in the just up to 100 kilometers per hour, and from that point of view, it's probably okay on the freeway, but it's certainly better off on B-grade country roads and around town. Suspension wise, we have a 41mm upside down fork on the front that's non-adjustable and has a travel of around 120mm. On the rear we have a single monoshock which is adjustable for preload, which gives you around 126mm of travel. Now the front suspension was excellent on the ride. I did find that the rear was just a tad soft and was bottoming out over bad bumps. Now it is adjustable for preload and there's certainly plenty of scope to firm that up a little bit for my body weight. But in saying that, the bike never lost its head over bumps or through corners, and certainly even with the suspension in the factory settings was more than adequate for the horsepower and performance characteristics of this motorcycle. Really, this motorcycle is a delight to run through corners. You will find at roundabouts and slow speed corners, with these fairly small tyres, you have to take a little bit of a care to get a good line through the corner because, like a scooter with its small wheels, it can be a little bit harder to control at slow speeds compared to a full-size motorcycle. But once you get a little speed underway and a bit more gyroscopic action in those wheels, this motorcycle handles really nicely through corners, and certainly in its design speed range of between 60 and 90 kilometers per hour, the handling of this motorcycle is excellent. Now the tyres are a bit of an unknown quantity. They're actually a Cordial brand, and I have no idea, it's probably another Chinese brand out there that I've never heard of, and so I'd probably replace those with a better quality tyre at some point if you want to get into some serious scratching on this bike. In the braking department, the bike is fitted with a 210mm disc on the front with a 2-piston sliding caliper and a 190mm disc on the rear with a single piston caliper. Now I found the braking to be excellent for the weight of the motorcycle. Certainly the front brake is nice and progressive. It's not up to superbike standards obviously, but it really is a fabulous brake and really gives you enough braking again for the performance characteristics of the motorcycle. The rear brake showed no signs of locking up with moderate to intermediate use, and I found the whole braking package to be well balanced on this bike. Now I'll just cover a few of the other dimensions of the motorcycle. The seat height is 780mm, so certainly it's quite suitable for a short rider. I did find the seat a little bit uncomfortable. It's just a little bit firm, and certainly after an hour of riding, I found that it was starting to become a bit uncomfortable for me. It actually has fairly firm padding. Now the wheelbase is 1215mm. And the bike has a weight of 124 kilograms. And that's probably a dry weight. I don't think that's a wet weight. Now the fuel capacity of the bike is 7.2 litres, and the overall dimensions of the motorcycle are 1770mm in length, 760mm in width, and 1.25mm in overall height. Now the fit and finish of the bike, it has a fairly conventional switchgear on it, which is of above average quality, I would say. Probably not up to top quality Japanese or Italian standards, but certainly it is a good quality switchgear. Now the dash is reminiscent of its big brother, the 1130 TnT, in that it has an analog tacho with an inset speedo with a fuel gauge and a few other bits and pieces. Now I did find that the warning lights at the top, there's a neutral light and a couple of other lights there, are actually rather hard to see in bright daylight. You can really only see them in shaded or at night. So from that point of view, the dash probably is a bit of a letdown. Now the styling of the motorcycle is styled after its bigger brother in many respects. These shrouds on the front of the tank are sort of reminiscent of the radiator shrouds on its bigger brother, the TnT 1130. But the exhaust system is certainly more reminiscent of the MV Agusta dragster. And in many respects, it has styling cues from the Benelli TnT and the MV Agusta dragster. The headlight is reminiscent of the bigger TnT and has quite a nice beam on it. So in conclusion, I'd have to say that I thoroughly enjoyed riding the Benelli TnT 135. You know, it's an ideal motorcycle to learn on if you're looking to start off riding something that is small and lightweight. You know, it's not an intimidating motorcycle, but it's got a manual gearbox and clutch, so you know it's an ideal platform to start out on if you're looking to move up to a larger motorcycle. Again, it's the perfect choice for around town as a commuter. It's got enough get up and go to get you ahead of the traffic, but it's small enough that you can really get into those tight spaces in peak hour traffic. Out in the hills is probably not quite so well suited unless you're looking for something that's different and a real challenge. You know, you really do have to keep this engine on the boil. You know, you really need to keep it between 7,000 and 9,000 RPM and change up gears pretty quickly to get the best out of it. But you know, it's quite a fine handling motorcycle. The trellis steel frame is nice and rigid. You know, the big diameter upside down forks at the front have good rigidity. The braking is good. The rear shock was just a little soft in my test, but I'm sure I could up the preload on that. And as I said earlier, the seat is just a little bit uncomfortable for those long rides for me. You know, that will probably vary a little bit from person to person. You know, overall, this is a really exciting little motorcycle to ride. Has good ground clearance in the corners, and certainly through the tight corners that I took it on today, I thoroughly enjoyed riding this, and I would certainly recommend that if you're looking at the Honda Grom or the Kawasaki equivalent, it'll be well worth looking at the Benelli and taking it for a test ride and comparing the two and see what you think. The Benelli is also a little bit cheaper than the Honda Grom. In Melbourne, Australia, it's going for around $3,999 on the road. Which is pretty good. I think the Grom is over 4,000 now, though I don't have the current pricing on that to hand. So, you know, it's also a slightly cheaper motorcycle. I'd also like to thank A1 Motorcycles for loaning me the Benelli TnT 135. You'll find their contact details in the description below. And I think that's about all I've got to say about this fun little motorcycle. I think I'll take it for another ride before I take it back to the shop. I'll catch you next time.